name is David Carruth, and I'm the site assistant at Brodoclea. But that's a kind of funny kind of role because it doesn't really just involve working at Brodoclea. It involves kind of working across a lot of the sites, but also helping to manage the agroforestry sort of projects, as well as the woolly pig company where we sell our produce through.
Quite a unique field to be in. Can you share a little bit about how you found yourself working in conservation?
So I grew up dairy farming conventionally. Both my grandparents had dairy farms, and I'd always wanted to become a farmer. And I guess and that's really where it was on the farm and working the farm that I really that's where my interest in the natural world and love for the environment and biodiversity sort of came from. But you're always this was during the time where the dairy industry was very much in decline, and you weren't directly put off, but continuing on the farm, but you were sort of made very aware of how tough things were. So I started to sort of look out into other sort of things and explore other passions, and of course my other passion was in conservation, and in particular I really enjoyed spending time in woodlands and found woodlands really interesting. So I got involved a lot in volunteering a lot with conservation organizations all over the world, and working. And then eventually, if you do something for long enough in conservation, you start getting paid for it. So mostly kind of working and volunteering in woodland habitat restoration. But at the time, I was also kind of becoming very aware of how things were changing within those systems, and the sort of wider environmental problems that were going on in the world, and the biodiversity crisis, and started to sort of engage with campaign groups and things like that as well, and wanting to learn more about what was going wrong and sort of what we could do about it. So I started studying environmental science. So I went through part-time study, a degree in environmental science, and then at the end of that, I just sort of stumbled across a job that brought me back to agriculture. I mean, I think during the time when I was working with a lot of environmental groups, there was there's a lot of what is sort of calculated in with what's happening to the world is sort of attributed to agriculture, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly, and you get told a lot of the things about what agriculture's role was in that in this situation, and it didn't always equate to my kind of lived experience of that. So sorry, there's a plane going over again. So it just sort of made me sort of start to look out and see, right, what like where is the sort of like where are we kind of going wrong here? What's amiss in this situation? And that's what kind of got me into sort of researching and learning and getting on farms with farmers that are trying to really kind of find the solutions to a lot of the big questions, and the whole ecological movement and regenerative farming movement, and that's kind of when the opportunity came up to work at Brodoclea and bring the two worlds together in a way in the one job, which was great for me anyway.
That's really cool. I actually also studied environmental science, so that's cool. I think you have quite a unique, well, you're in quite a unique position in that you understand both worlds, coming from like an agricultural family. Could you share a little bit about, I guess, some of the misconceptions around that and just how you view it and how, I guess, in your mind, there is a world in which everything can, we can have a sustainable food system that includes agriculture and still have a sustainable planet?
That's a big question. Sure, I mean, the history around transition in agriculture has been a very long and painful one. I mean, we have the first examples of farming and sort of the sort of ways that we sort of the lead up to the ways that we see now can be found almost 11,000 years ago. So it's very uh, difficult to, I mean, what's happened to rural peoples on land is probably the first thing that we need to sort of acknowledge when sort of thinking about this, and also that when it comes to the climate crisis and when it comes to the biodiversity crisis, and rural communities and farming communities are very much on the front lines of that, and are also in being on the land, and the land is one of the biggest areas for healing and working out these sort of issues. They have an opportunity to do something about it, but are not always empowered to do so. And there can be a lot of barriers that stand in the way for rural communities and people to go out and farm the way they want to farm, and farm with the land instead of on it. So there was almost a very sort of there's a series of unjust transitions that sort of led up to the sort of damaging practices that the damaging practices agriculturally. So trying to sort of sorry, what was the whole question again? Trying to sort of bring it back to it.
Yeah, I think you've answered it really well. I think it's just about acknowledging that, we can't just get rid of agriculture. Like, that's not the solution to having like sustainable future. It's not getting rid of it. It's finding ways to work with communities and to bring in regenerative practices and things like that, which I think you touched on really well.
Yeah, it's about finding just transitions for rural communities and letting the people on the land have the solutions, and giving either empowering the people that are already on the land, or giving people access to land that can come on and do good things. And I think we can really start to answer a lot of the questions whilst going through that process. And I think agriculturally damaging. I think it's important to always look at the production, and instead of the food type as well. I think it's whichever food type, whatever your diet is, there's a good way and a bad way of producing that food, and we need to be doing it the good way at this time, and that's how we start to heal things.
Very well said. So, what does a typical day look like for you at Brodoclea?
So we kind of split the day into two sections where we have our we get our dailies done in the morning. So what we call our dailies. So everything working with the pigs, feeding the pigs, looking at the fencing, moving things around, checking bedding, water supplies, anything that's kind of not working okay. We often show people around the site, so we kind of do educational tours for people in the local community, and so we call them our dailies, and then we get them done in the morning, and then in the afternoon the sky's the limit really. It could be anything. from getting big infrastructure projects or continuing on with big infrastructure projects, working on other sites, whatever jobs need doing, so moving around the country, um, and or getting home on the computer to work on the Woolly Pig Company, or just really anything that needs done. It can be a really wild and sort of variety of jobs. But the main sort of thing is our dailies. We need to get our dailies done every day, and I mean that means every day, even on Christmas Day or bank holidays. So there's someone on site every day.
And for anyone who hasn't visited the site, how would you describe it?
So Brodoclea is a 430-acre regenerating woodland. Mostly native broadleaf, but not strictly. I think it's a really wild mix of sort of planting areas that have a lot of that all have a really direct purpose. So it's a really interesting woodland to start off with, and then we've incorporated agroforestry into the mix. So we're working at our main enterprises with the pigs. So we rotationally graze Mangalitza pigs through 20 separate woodland paddocks around our site. The pigs give a lot to the woodland. So that's their sort of main function, is in sort of aiding. Yeah, essentially anything that we're doing on site sort of has to sort of any enterprise that we're bringing on site has to either aid or help the regeneration of the woodland, or not interfere with it at all. So as I say, we're doing a little bit of agritourism and a bit of agroforestry, and then we're hoping to kind of build from there and expand outwards and get as much of the is sort of as much for the local community from the site as we can, as well as achieving our goals for the regeneration the woodland habitat creation project.
I think you touched on one of the animals, the woolly pigs, but besides the Plaza show, what else can you expect to find at the site?
So it's an amazing little oasis. It's kind of hidden up on top of the hills above Dalry, just below the community wind farm. So we're quite kind of elevated. So rough grazing, or it was rough grazing, sort of sheep ground, and there wasn't any sort of direct line, for sort of natural habitat regeneration. So there's no sort of adjacent woodland or next to us or anything like that. So your perfect place for woodland creation, really. And so it's surprised me, because it's the original planting was about 12 years ago. How much biodiversity has returned to the site in in that very short space of time. We're especially at this time of year, you're just surrounded every day by birds and wildflowers and all sorts of insects and a few other things that surprise you. Especially kind of and frogs and toads and lizards and everything in between. So we did a recent, we had last year we had a bird survey, which found at this time of year there was 42 species surveyed on site, with 32 of them nesting on site. And at the BirdLife, we had a plant survey just the other week in just one of our paddocks, found 125 species of plant, and that for a field, an agricultural field, that's pretty crazy sort of numbers. So um, yeah, it is a pretty wildly diverse place, and I think what's really interesting, what sort of holds that biodiversity, the key to that biodiversity, is the woodland creation and the sort of diverse mix of woodland creation that we brought into that was installed to the site. And how it kind of follows on to different stages of succession in a way, and that in turn, creates habitat for a whole range of different species. So it's it is a pretty magical place. We're continuing the work with the surveying as we kind of go, and now what's great is we're having groups like the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the conservation volunteers are sort of interested in helping out. So now we're getting our moth survey this week, and yeah, well, so we're just building up a picture of what's going on there, and how we can, and that the more yes, a lot of what we do and a lot of what we change is just pure observational, and you can see what needs done, but it's good to have that information that can really sort of guide us on how best how the land wants to be farmed and worked.
That's amazing. And do you have like a favorite species of plants or animal that you always get really excited about finding or seeing?
So many. I think the obvious one is our ospreys, because they're the sort of stars of the show in a way. So it's always good when they return to the site after their migration and set up shop again. With the plants, my favorite species of tree is got to be the aspen. And to have a few aspen on site is really lovely, and hopefully we'll be able to get a few more soon. So yeah, it's something about aspen is quite magical, with especially the coloration through and the sort of genetic changes that it goes through, depending on what the sort of genome is, the way it sort of colors through the autumn, and sort of spreads out with its suckers for. I think with aspen, the largest living formation on the planet is an aspen tree that's cloned itself so many times it's created entire woodlands. So they're pretty incredible trees.
That's incredible. I had no idea they could do that. In terms of the woolly pigs, like, what is that like? That's quite different for, I guess, a forest job to have these little creatures to take care of. Do they keep you on your toes?
Yes. I mean, yes and no. Actually, they look after themselves really well on the woodland. They're so well adapted to being there, and they're very happy there, which is probably. I always say for us, 70% of the work with pigs is in fencing, but actually the best fencing you can have is good forage. So if they're and good company as well, if they're happy in their group, if they're happy with if they've got a good amount of food to get stuck into, then they're not looking to trouble the fencing too much at all. And yeah, so it's they and also they're just a really nice breed to work with. Mangalitza, a really nice temperament, and that's kind of what, and also very well adapted, and they kind of like with their own health and everything, because they have such a wide sort of diversity of forage. They keep well. They look after themselves. If there's something that's missing from their diet, they know how to identify what to go and eat and go and get it. So we don't really have health problems within the herd for now, touch wood. So and we haven't really experienced any huge difficulties with having them on the land. And whereas we've observed a lot of benefits to the woodland.
Would you mind touching on some of those benefits?
Yep. So I mean, sort of main purpose of the pigs, or having pigs in woodland, is to sort of control those dominant species on the forest floor, and manage the forage, and they are the ultimate kind of ecosystem service, sort of ecosystem engineers, with their snouts. So they're grazing down those, or are turning over the dominant species on the forest floor, letting light down into the sort of base, and which means that we can see a lot more diversity in species being able to come through, as well as the young saplings being able to kind of break through as well, past the bracken and the long grass, as well as turn, that awakening and having benefits to the soil and the soil micro organisms, in the in sort of feeding those systems with that turning over of organic matter, and adding of their own on feces into the mix, which is really good for plants, which is really great plant food, and breaks down very slowly in the soils. So that's the sort of main benefit to the woodland and the trees itself. But we're also observing a lot of interaction with the pigs and our local biodiversity. And what we're seeing is well, so that's in the main, so for the woodland, but they're also creating areas of wetland, which is also another habitat, that they're digging through, and wetting areas, and that's really good as well. But for local biodiversity, what we're seeing is a lot of interaction with the pigs, especially with the birds. We'll see a lot more diversity in species of birds in the areas where the pigs are grazing, as opposed to the areas where the pigs are not grazing. Um, Invertebrates to breed, so the things that the birds eat, and then also the birds are feeding directly in behind the pigs, when the pigs are running around, as well as as benefiting our raptors, because the pigs are moving of course keeping the graze down, the forage down, which is opening up areas, which means that things like voles, that our owls and our kestrels eat, as well as our weasels and stoats and foxes, have less sort of cover to hide. So it's kind of a benefit to them as well. And then also we observe the birds using the wool from the pigs, that sort of naturally, the pigs naturally shed their wool through the summer, and the nesting materials, because the pigs build nests, which is a very it's a whole other thing. But so they use the materials to go and build their own nests. So there's a lot of benefit to the local, biodiversity as well, but also in resilience. As I say, they're creating areas of wetland, so keeping water staying on the site, helping to build the topsoil, and build the soils around the trees, which is holding on to more water, but also controlling the brash, what will fall over, and especially, we've just had that period there of very warm weather. We where anyone owning a woodland is getting a bit nervous, or working in a woodland is getting a bit nervous, but because we have the pigs there, they're grazing under the trees, and anything that the fuel load is non-existent, because the pigs are either mulching it down or grazing on it. So it actually makes the the woodland more resilient to the changing world that we're currently living in.
That's really cool. They do quite a multitude of jobs. In terms of the community, you touched on this briefly, but what has it been like to kind of, as someone that grew up in the area and has, seen areas like this for years, what was it like to be able to come in and play a role in restoring it and working with the community to kind of create the space again?
Well, the work is ongoing, and we're getting there, slowly. We are only 2 years in, but it's everything. When you have a good connection to the land, to stay on the land, and it is very, very difficult at the moment for young people with mad ideas, like rotationally mob grazing Mangalitza pigs, to get access to land, to get that going. So it actually, it's an absolutely fantastic opportunity, but it's more so it kind of keeps me in that place and keeps me connected to what's kind of important, um, and also in touch with the rural communities. And I think one of the sort of aims is to sort of show that, you know, reforestation doesn't have to be the end to agriculture, and we don't need that kind of seepage out of our rural communities, and we can actually grow our rural communities through doing this work, and build people onto the land, and into these models. And I think that's the sort of um, that's the I know not directly or scientifically, but that kind of disconnect that we so often talk about with us, with the people and the natural world, and living off the land and instead of kind of with it, you know, is something that we need to kind of we should be addressing. And I think, um, hopefully in opening up our woodland and creating an amazing community space, as well as things that are more meaningful like employment and um, other opportunities and opportunities for local volunteer groups and businesses to kind of get involved, as well as, you know, services, agricultural services and things that we use um, every month. So that's 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 a lot, you know. That's I think that's a much more just transition, in this scenario than otherwise. And I think what what we're doing whilst creating that is building resilience into our woodland. So the enterprise financially supports the woodland, but anyone, you know, and investors don't always just turn up with big wads of cash. You know, it's anyone that's in putting time and care and love into that place, and therefore if it, you know, ever looks to become deforested, or you know, anyone takes over and has different ideas, then, you know, the community it's often rural communities that step in to provide protection. So that's the sort of financial and security sort of support to that woodland in the long term, and that's really what we're trying to sort of build into the model.
You've touched on this as well, but just, I guess, to summarize, like, why is it so important to restore areas of woodland, both on a local level, but also in terms of the global impact it makes?
Because, well, first of all, um, you know, we are mostly, we were, you know, after the last ice age, we were, you know, especially in Scotland, we were a forested nation, a forested landscape. So this sort of reforesting idea and building habitat into sort of what we're doing now is really important for biodiversity, and also sort of recovering what has been lost in a way. Um, so, but, you know, I think also in the sort of service that forests provide for for communities, and you know, it's the cooling effect that they have, the protection from wind, from you know, the storing of water, and then also the storing of carbon and other greenhouse gases in the soils, and that sort of having, of course, the, you know, being a way to address the climate change, and also um, the other sort of big environmental problems of you know that everybody's sort of really concerned, rightly really concerned about at this time.
It's not always easy work to do what you're doing. It can be quite disheartening, so, you know, and sometimes quite difficult. Um, what keeps you motivated and passionate, especially on the difficult days?
Um, well, you can see it working. I think that's probably the main thing, is that you know, you can witness it, and I guess it's not like the most scientific way of measuring something or anything like that, but you can see the land responding to what you're doing, and you can see species that you haven't seen before coming back onto the site. And um, so, yeah, the woodland keeps me motivated. Um, I'm the kind of person that if I think there's a agricultural rural attitude to what we the way that we can address this problem, and I think maybe it's something for others to learn from. Whereas if there's something that is going wrong and there's something that needs done, around the farm or in the woodland, yeah, problems occur as they do. It's not always, it's never a good time, and you might not have the resources and everything you need to uh, go and solve it, but you get what you can, and you roll your sleeves up and you get it done. And I feel like um, you can't be just waiting around to for things to get worse. You know, and in doing so, there's a sort of benefit to taking on a problem of that, and getting hands on with these problems. I think in dealing with any sort of anxieties that you have, the problems that are occurring around the world at this time. Um, I just sort of wish decision makers further up the chain had this sort of same up and get 'em sort of attitude to these sort of problems. Yeah, I think we need to let out our inner farmer a bit more.
That's a good motto. If you had to think about the last few years, is there anything like a singular moment or experience that stands out as kind of the most rewarding experience so far?
Oh gosh. Um, I don't know. I think it's sometimes just that sort of, it's hard to explain, but the sort of seasonal shift in a way into summer, into the really sort of productive time every year, where um it sort of, everything sort of comes back and shows you that it is there, and that that we've when you give an inch, it'll take a mile. It's yeah, the rewards are are sort of, there's not like a, a big moment, um and maybe you need to look and be ready and kind of a bit open to seeing them, um but they are there, and it might just be, after a hard day, you take a wee sit down and take it in a little bit, and look out into the wood, and see, and look at the species of birds that are coming back, or sort of, old friends returning to the woodland after migration, and young fledglings, chicks, insects, bugs, you know, just seeing things happening, and trees growing, and things working out. I think it's the rewards are all around you. I think, and I don't think there's a sort of individual moment where you're. I think those moments come when you take the time to acknowledge them.
Very well said. My last question is just if there's anything that you wish people knew about Brodoclea and the woolly pigs, or anything specific that you wish you could share with everyone.
Um, I think the view, probably from our viewpoint on the highest part of the site, up in the hills, where you can look out at the woodland and see the whole woodland from the one space. Um, and and sort of take it in and take take stock of what's happening there. I think. Um, uh, yeah, I think, and the feeling as well. I think that I think that's a bit that's it's easy enough to share the view because you can walk onto the woodland anytime. It's open. There's an access gate. You can come in and see it for yourself. But the feeling sitting up there after a kind of maybe like a hard day's work and and uh, and feeling like you've done something good, you know, with your day. I think and the connection to the land and an understanding of what's happening around you and the feeling of being grounded in that kind of in that space, I think is probably um, something I think we need more people to feel. I think um, I think yeah, I think that's the answer. I don't mean to be too philosophical, but I'd
Uh-huh.
say that that's probably what I'd like to share. If you could bottle that, then you'd probably be a millionaire in no time. But that's not the point.
I actually just have to go back to one last question, which is just that you recently won an award. And I was wondering if you'd mind sharing a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yes, we were given the sort of so it's the um, young person farm woodland award. We won at the Scottish finalist. Well, it's part of the Scottish finest woodlands awards, which I think they call the Tree Oscars. I think uh, that was really cool. Like when I got the phone call to say if I want to put my name forward for doing that, I I did sort of say to the lady down the phone that I'm very flattered, but I'm actually 32 years of age, and I don't think I qualify for the Young Person's Award. And she reminded me that actually I think the cutoff age is around 40 or something like that. So um, I don't know what it says about agroforestry, and but yeah, hopefully with what we're doing here, what we might see coming up in the future is these reforested areas becoming more accessible to new entrants into working on the land. And if we can show that there are ways of managing land productively that is reforested areas in a way that can work for people, then hopefully there'll be plenty more applicants that will oust me and I'll be quite pleased about that.